You are now tuned in to the Commissioner's Conversation.
Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is
Commissioner Gordon.
Yes, sir. Welcome back. You are tuned in to the Commissioner's Conversation. I am your host, Commissioner Gordon. Joining me today, good friend of the show, guy I got to know really well. We did a little podcast together, a little Hawk Talk. I think it was the Birds of the Word. I think it was
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, from 92.9 The Game, Andy Bunker. Andy, how you doing today, man?
Great, Gordon. Thanks so much for having me on, man. The only thing that's a bummer about the podcast is we were doing it when they were still in the rebuild.
Right.
We didn't get a chance to talk about them winning all these basketball games and going to the playoffs and all that. We were with them. We were talking about them every single week when nobody was talking about them.
Right. We were literally started from the bottom when it was the lowest of the low, and they were putting this thing together.
Yeah.
Cam Reddish was looking terrible. We had he doesn't look much better now.
Well, he was playing at least.
Yeah, at least he was playing.
Yeah.
You know, DeAndre Hunter was playing. I mean, he got back to action last night and looked fairly well. I mean, I would say. But yeah, it's this whole thing, and we can start with the Atlanta Hawks, man. This whole thing, it has been a pleasure to watch. I mean, what is your take on the Atlanta Hawks ever since they've let go of Coach Lloyd Pierce?
Well, it was the right move, and at the time, I don't know. I don't know that I was one of those people that didn't think that they should do it. I just thought it was kind of weird how they went about it because it was, there was like 2 more games before the All-Star break. Right. And I know that morning he had run practice and he had met with the media. And then that afternoon it was like, and we're going to get rid of Lloyd Pierce. I was like, oh, okay. The timing's a little strange. In hindsight, it actually worked out really well because Nate McMillan got to have 2 games where he was the head coach before the All-Star break happened. So he could sort of see from that seat exactly what he needed to see, and whatever was work with rotations and all that, and try to just get a little bit of a finger on the pulse of that team, and then have a week where he could kind of step back and say, all right, we need to do this, this, and this. We need to do these things in the fourth quarter. We might move this rotation around a little bit, but they've just become a really solid fundamental basketball team since he took over. Just the things that they weren't doing in terms of making the extra pass or making the switch defensively, or, I mean, whatever the little things were that added up to so many of those fourth quarters not going their way under Lloyd Pierce, they're doing a lot better now. And I think it does need to be mentioned, they've gotten healthy finally. Now, right. Nate was still dealing with injuries too. And I mean, they won some pretty impressive basketball games without all their guys. Like they beat Milwaukee without Trey. And that was really crazy. And that was Bogdanovich and Lou Williams more than anything in that fourth quarter. It was wild. But you can just see him when you watch him now, especially late in games, although maybe not the other night against Washington where they gave up 45 points in the fourth quarter. But usually late in games, they look a lot more poised. They look a lot more under control offensively. Guys seem to understand what their role is supposed to be defensively. And it looks like a really well-coached basketball team, which is, unfortunate to say, because I really like Lloyd. As a guy, unfortunately, there was some shortcomings as a coach that we're seeing now since Nate's taken over that have been dealt with. But they look like a real team. Before, they kind of felt like they got some pretty good players individually, and if Trey had a great night himself, or if John Collins had a great night himself, maybe they might win. But now Trey will go out and score 15 points and have 10 assists, and Bogdanovich will have 30, or Gallinari will have 30, or something like that, where it doesn't always have to be one guy. It's really better spread out now. So hopefully that serves them well in the playoffs, and getting DeAndre Hunter back last night too, big deal.
Yeah, with the whole coaching situation, there was 2 things that kind of stand out for me. One is I heard something on a broadcast last night, and if you were watching it on NBA TV, I think they were showing us the Washington Wizards broadcast as opposed to the Hawks. And I heard something that I never really heard coming from when they were coached from Lloyd Pierce, and that was one of the commentators saying, that was a great play drawn up out of the timeout by the Atlanta Hawks, by Coach Nate McMillan. And we never heard those type of compliments. Not to say that he didn't draw up pretty good plays, but it wasn't as, it's noticeable now. And then two, there was a podcast that Trey was on, that he basically said, we believe, like Nick McMillan has gotten us to believe in what we're doing. And that was another thing that I thought that maybe, I don't know how he act on the sidelines, but maybe that was one of the things where, like, coaching is, players take on the coach's demeanor a little bit. So maybe Lloyd was a little frantic and later on in the games in tight situations where Nate McMillan may be a little more calm under the pressure, and the team reflects that. So I think that those are two things that I noticed since Nate McMillan is taking over for the squad. I know there's a lot of talk around the city in terms of should Nate be hired back next season, and should that depend on the Hawks postseason? For me personally, I say that I would love for him to be hired back, and regardless of what the Hawks have done, just because of the 180 almost that it seems that the team is taking. What are you saying to that aspect?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, I don't know what else. I understand the playoffs are going to be a different measuring stick, and if they win a playoff series, I mean, yeah, definitely. I don't know how you can not give him a contract, but I'm with you. What else could he have done? What could Nate McMillan have done in about 40 games that he's coached that would have been better? I don't know how he possibly could have done a better job than he's done, given the fact that he's been dealing with injuries. He had to take over in the middle of the season. You saw what they were before. They were 14-20 when he got the team, and they would lose games in these frustrating ways. They don't tend to do that anymore. So I agree that him being the coach going forward is the right move. I do understand that there's no rush. I mean, he's probably going to, if they don't do it immediately, he'll probably get phone calls from other teams, because there's going to be teams that have vacancies this offseason. Who knows what'll happen if certain teams that have high expectations don't make it far in the playoffs. Like not that Coach Bud is coming back to Atlanta, but Coach Bud might get fired if Milwaukee doesn't make the conference finals. Terry Stotts might get fired in Portland if they don't make the conference finals. Like, there's some pretty good coaches that are going to be out there. And I understand if Travis Schlenk and these guys want to, at least give themselves the opportunity to have those conversations. Who knows who might end up come available? Maybe the Celtics freak out and Brad Stevens ends up on the market. Who knows? So if you can wait and it doesn't impact your relationship with Nate, I see the benefit of doing that. But I do think in the long run, he's going to get the job, and I think that he should. And even if they go to the playoffs and don't win that first playoff series, it's going to matter how they look. There's bad playoff series losses, and there's more acceptable playoff series losses. If they make the 4 seed or 5 seed and play the Knicks and get swept, all right, we might be having a slightly different conversation about Nate. But if they go and they play a good series, then yeah, I think people feel good about it. If they beat them and they're if they're in the second round of the playoffs, that's ahead of schedule for this rebuild to me. So, I do think Nate ends up getting hired full time.
And that brings me to the matchup that we were talking about with the Knicks. Like, I'm pulling for that matchup being the 4-5. Everything's tight because Miami is also right there. I think that is a more winnable matchup that we can look at, and like you said, and not to say that we couldn't beat Miami, and I'm using we as us being here in the city, but not to say that the Hawks couldn't beat Miami in a 7-game series. I think Miami is a very a beatable team, but it would favor the Atlanta Hawks, I would say, that they would match up against the Knicks as opposed to the Miami Heat.
Yeah, I'm with you. I want the Knicks in the first round too. And that feels, a little bit counterintuitive given how the Hawks have done against the Knicks this year.
Right.
They've lost all the games against them, and Julius Randle has taken them apart. And now I do think the Hawks were going to win that game a couple weeks ago when they were up 8, when Trey gets hurt in that fourth quarter, and they end up taking them to overtime. But I want the Knicks for the attention of it, because that the Knicks are going to get hyped up so much by all the national folks love the Knicks, and the Knicks are back and all this. And I do think the Knicks are good. They got some nice players on that team, but I think the Hawks are deeper than them. Now, I don't know what they do against Julius Randle, honestly. Maybe it's one of those situations where, all right, Julius Randle kind of gets his, and you don't let anybody else get theirs. You try to take everybody else out of it. If Julius goes for 35 a game or whatever, you could live with that if you take everybody else out. Because I don't know that they have one individual on the team that you just put on Julius and does a good enough job to neutralize him. I don't want any part of Jimmy Butler in the playoffs. That's my issue with Miami is playoff Jimmy flips that switch. Same thing with Eric Spoelstra. He's a great coach, and you have to go up against that team 4, 5, 6, 7 games in a row. Eric Spoelstra is going to notice flaws in your game plan, and I think Nate's a very good coach. I think Eric Spoelstra is a better one. I think Nate and Tom Thibodeau is a matchup that the Hawks have I like the Hawks against the Knicks for all the other stuff beyond just the rosters. I don't want any part of what they have down there in Miami. We saw what they did in the bubble, and I'm not convinced that they don't go on another little run like that, just as talented as that roster is. So I'm with you. I would love it. I would love it if the Knicks are the first round matchup.
And you talked about Jimmy Butler, man. There's only a few guys that we actually consider like a guy that can actually put the team on his back and will them to win. And Jimmy Butler is one of those guys. Yep. We've seen it in Chris Paul. Chris Paul is one of those guys. We've seen it in Dame Lillard. Dame is one of those guys where he
absolutely.
But with the Atlanta Hawks, we faced a guy last night in Russell Westbrook who broke the record, and shout out to Russell Westbrook for breaking Oscar Robertson's triple-double record. But is that like a hollow achievement, considering the fact that me personally, I don't even consider him a top 5 player in today's game? I really don't. I would stretch to consider Russell Westbrook a top 5 point guard in the league right now. So with all the accolades that he's given, and I totally commend him on everything that he's done, because he's a hell of a player. He's a hard-nosed player. He only has one speed, but it's like I said, it's kind of a hollow achievement considering the fact that you're not considered one of the greats. Am I wrong in that, or do you feel the same way?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I think Russell Westbrook is such an interesting figure in this era where, I mean, I can't say that the triple-double record is anything other than incredible. Like, in order to do that, 182, and the thing is, 182 is what he did last night. He's going to get to like 250 before it's all said and done. And yeah, I mean, I think some nights there's times where guys get out of the way so Russ can get the rebound. Sure. But you can't and we were talking about it today on the radio, and people are saying, that the stats are hollow in some ways. Like, I don't know, man. Like, you can't get 182 hollow triple doubles. Like, there might be a couple of them, but you don't average a triple double for a season and not be a Hall of Fame type player. You can be a Hall of Fame type player though, and still never be the best player in the league, which he never was. And he's probably not going to win a championship, which, okay, that happens. There's guys that have great careers and don't win championships. It's not as easy as people make it seem. So he is such a weird guy to try to put into a specific box, because he probably never was the best point guard in a season in his era. Chris Paul's in there being great at times. Steph is in there being great at times. Kyrie, when he's on the court, there's other guys that are in that conversation. And there are legitimate criticisms of Russell Westbrook's game. Like, he is erratic at times. He does take bad shots. He will turn the ball over in a really important moment. I thought last night against the Hawks was like a perfect little summary of him as a player. He had a triple double where he scored 28, he had 21 assists, and he had 13 rebounds. He willed his team back into the basketball game in the fourth quarter by just taking over and being unstoppable. And then he got a look at the game winner and he threw up a terrible shot with 3 seconds left on the clock and he took it too early. Like, it was everything that Russell Westbrook is all in one night. So yeah, I think all of the good stuff that you say about him is true. Some of the negative stuff that you say about him is also true. And that's exactly who he's been as a player. I know that it's very popular these days to try to boil it down to like, is he overrated or is he underrated or is he disrespected or all that? I don't know how he could be disrespected. The man's a 10-time All-Star and he was the MVP of the league and he's made $250 million in his career. Disrespect me like that, please. I would take all the disrespect for that type of bank account. I think he's accurately rated because of all the good stuff and some of the bad stuff. Like it's all part of it. And that's okay. Like, you're not a hater if you're talking about Russell Westbrook having shortcomings. You're not a fanboy if you're talking about 182 triple doubles being incredible. There's a lot of stuff that can be true at once. You know what I mean? And I know that in media these days, that's not the way that it works, but it is.
Well, and even like, I won't say I wasn't in terms of the record maybe a little, look a little funny because of, like I said, like we said, how we felt, but in his stats, you can't fake 20 rebounds.
Nope.
you can't fake 20 assists. Like, okay, it's one thing if he was going for 25, 10, and 10, and you would say, oh man, come on, he's barely getting by, whatever. But
he's also been on some damn good teams. He's been on some really good basketball teams. Like, it's not like we're talking about a guy who's getting all these numbers and his team wins 25 games a year. He's in the playoffs every year. Like, and I know, again, they didn't win a championship. I get it. I think if him and KD and they traded Harden, which was, I thought, dumb all those years ago, if they would have kept those three together in Oklahoma City, they would have multiple banners probably. But they didn't, and that's not his fault. And KD wanted to go play with Steph and those guys, and that's the way it went. But yeah, I mean, Russell Westbrook is incredible, and he's going to the Hall of Fame, and he should.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm hoping for. I'm actually hoping that they win in the play-in games. They get the 7th seed, and they meet Brooklyn. Because can you imagine the chip?
Oh man, I hadn't even thought about that.
They meet
what
Brooklyn.
A freaking story.
KD has left him. James Harden has left him. The chip on his shoulder would be enormous. He would be going 100 miles an hour to the point where you could just feel the steam off of your television set. So I'm actually pulling for that. I wish.
And I hadn't even thought about that. That's a great idea. That's even juicier than the one game play-in between LeBron and Steph would be.
Right. And
that would be great too. But man, give me a 7-game series between Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant. And just give me Russell Westbrook in a play-in game. That's probably where they're going to end up anyway. Like, that dude does not know how to not go 100 miles an hour.
Exactly.
Which is the other thing that I love about him too, is he's one of one. Like, Russell Westbrook is his own individual type of player. I don't know who to compare him to in the NBA. And the other thing is, I don't know, like, if you're growing up watching him, like, so many guys look at Steph, the kids now, they look at Steph and they're like, oh, I want to do that. Like, kind of an undersized guy, shoots threes, I can do that. No, you can't do it like Steph can. Everybody thinks they can, but they can't. Nobody looks at Russell Westbrook and they're like, oh, I could do that. He's like freaking Superman out there.
And that's the other component of it, is that, one, his attitude. I think he's gotten comfortable. I'm not sure how the process, but I believe he's gotten very comfortable in his own skin and accepting that who he is. And so when he's out on the floor, he's not looking for the pleasantries. He's not looking for the dap up and, hey man, going down memory lane. We'll do that some other time. right now, and we've seen it when he's played against KD a couple times.
Yeah.
They've kind of barked and gone back and forth at each other. So with that, like, I'm so into the Brooklyn Nets, the Washington Wizards. I hope that it falls out that way because that would make for some hellified television.
Well, I hope Bradley Beal is able to get healthy too if that ends up happening. Because I mean, I think Brooklyn probably beats them, but they've been playing some good basketball, man. They had won 7 out of 10 coming into the Hawks game last night, and they lost obviously, but they got some shooters on that team, and not nothing great, but they got a couple guys that can shoot on that team. And I don't know. I mean, Russ and a healthy Bradley Beal, and I know healthy Bradley Beal is a long shot right now because of that hamstring that he's dealing with. But I don't know. That sounds like fun to me. I'm so looking forward to the playoffs this year because I don't know. Like, so often we go into the NBA playoffs where it's like, all right, this team's the best or that team. It's going to be Cleveland and Golden State in the finals again, and that's just the way that it's going to be. I don't feel like I know anything about, I mean, I know some stuff, but I can't like confidently say this is the NBA finals, this is what's going to happen. And it's great. That makes it more interesting to me.
And this to me is what I always call like the best reality television. Like, you can watch all the Real Worlds or whatever, The Bachelor, whoever, but this is unscripted, regardless of what some people may think or whatever, but it's the most unscripted. You don't know, like you said, you can't call it one way or the other. And yes, it's played out to a point where there are 7 games and it's set up for probably the top seed or the home court advantage team to win, but it doesn't always happen. And this year, like, where there's more parity throughout the league, I would say, you have no idea. Like, you talked about Boston, like, what in the world is going on outside of, like, with injuries? I mean, you've had people question coaching. You had people talk about Kemba and all of that. Like, Jaylen Brown has recently hurt his wrist, I believe, and he's
out.
Yeah,
he's out for the rest of the year. Yeah,
so
sucks.
that is something that you're going to have to go, and Boston is going to have to deal with going into and probably a play-in game. And how does that reflect on Coach Brad Stevens? You talked about it a little earlier where you were saying, well, Boston fans may, be calling for his head somewhat, but does he get a pass, or are they just saying, look, business as usual, everybody gets hurt?
I think he probably will. I mean, Danny Ainge loves him. I mean, they brought him in and made it so clear from the early moments of his run there that, it might be bad early. We're rebuilding, all that. And they've had success for sure. But at some point, they've done all the stuff they're going to do as far as they acquired all those assets and they moved them for draft picks, and they got Tatum, who looks like a star, and Jaylen Brown, who's kind of, maybe like a second tier star, but a great player in the NBA. It's hard because Kemba doesn't play but once every 3 games.
Right.
And when Kemba's out there, they can be really good. Marcus Smart, same thing. He's been injured a lot this year too. But yeah, they've been a real head scratcher this year because it felt early like, okay, they'll figure it out. They got too much talent. Steven's a good coach, and they just never have. And then the Hawks have played them enough times this year too, where like you watch them play and it's like, oh, they're just not very good. Like They have a lot of deficiencies on this basketball team right now. And I think Stevens probably is safe, but at some point, I mean, he's supposed to be the Wonder Boy.
Exactly.
At some point, they gotta win something. They haven't even made it to an NBA Finals yet. And I know they were close, and they took LeBron to 7 a couple years ago and all that. But I mean, they've been gearing up for this thing for years now. So
well, last year, even last year, when you think about the bubble, they were this close. The Bam Adebayo blocking Jason Tatum's dunk, pretty much. They were this close, and I think that was. I'm not going to say that was their window. But I think like that was a shot because no one had Miami penciled in to go to the NBA Finals.
Oh, yeah, no.
So, yeah, it is something. It's going to be interesting to watch it play out. Like you said basically what I've been saying in terms of Brad Stevens had been considered like the genius. He's been considered this coaching genius, and it's yet to take to fruition. because they've had pieces. They had Kimball, they had Al Horford, you had Kyrie, Gordon Hayward. You've had pieces that they've tried and they've tinkered with to try to make this thing work, and it just hasn't come together just yet for the Boston Celtics. But it's unfortunate that Jaylen Brown has been injured, and we won't get a chance to see them at full strength coming into the playoffs. But I just wanted to get that idea as to what we should be looking for with Boston. But I mean, just continuing to go around the East. One of the most interesting teams, we talked about the Hawks getting the exposure by playing against the New York Knicks and having that big market and having that focus. So someone is looking at you, but kind of not really looking at you. I think that same thing could happen with Charlotte in the play-in game. Like, we're not quite ready yet for the playoffs, but hey, look at us. We got some cool stuff going on. We're dunking, we're making passes. It looks really fun. Michael Jordan might have something on his hands here with LaMelo Ball. Like, what's your take on this? I don't know if I should have, how much have you watched of Charlotte, but what's your take on what they're putting together?
Yeah, they got one right finally. They got a top draft pick, and it looks like they made the right choice. LaMelo looks like the real deal. And him coming back from injury recently too makes them scary in a play-in situation. Terry Rozier, man, like Boston got the short end of that stick. I love Kemba Walker. I love him going back to his UConn days, but he's just so injured all the time now. And Terry Rozier is having a crazy season, just a great season. And like you said, they got high flyers on that team. They got young guys. They got guys that can get buckets. Like they're putting together a nice little unit, a nice little core down there in Charlotte. And they're also ahead of where they expected to be too.
Right.
Like they're what did LaMelo get picked last year? 2, 3, something like that. So they're in the top end of the lottery last year. And I know it's because of the play-in, and that's okay. That's one of the things I like about the play-in. It gives 2 more teams the opportunity to not tank and try hard at the end of the season. But yeah, they're way ahead of schedule if they're able to sneak a play-in game and actually get into a 7-game series. But I love it. I mean, I grew up in the era of Larry Johnson, Muggsy Bogues, and Alonzo Mourning, and everybody wanted to have their Charlotte Hornets jerseys and starter jackets.
Yeah.
So I always had a soft spot in my heart for the Hornets because of those days. So yeah, I like what they're doing there. It's fun.
And ironically, I believe they would be playing it. Well, if it ended today, they would be playing Boston for the play-in game. Like,
right.
And so,
yeah, let Terry Rozier have a piece of that.
But even
he
with
wants
that,
all of that.
I love the way they shaped the play-in game. I wanted to get into it. I meant to get into it when we first got started, but we jumped right into the Hawks. I like the way they formatted it, because if it's 7, 8, 9, and 10, then usually typical you would think 7 plays 10, 8 plays 9. But I like the fact that they did the 7 versus 8, and then the 9 versus 10, and the way they formatted that to where the winner of 9 and 10 plays the loser of 7 and 8. And so that made for better matchups to me than it would be if it was 7 versus 10 and 8 versus 9. And I say that as it's not being done just yet. Like, I'm still saying, I'm saying that with how it looks today, it would look like a better matchup. But yeah, I think that would be so interesting to me, but that they would actually play, and that would give Charlotte that look. So if they're playing Boston and people are questioning whether Boston are going to be in the playoffs, and then they say, oh, well, damn, well, look at this Charlotte team over here. They look like fun. Let's keep an eye on them over the next couple seasons.
Yeah, that's a great point, because those games will be focused on, those will be, it'll play in games. It'll be the only game that night, or maybe it'll be 2 games that night, but it'll be Charlotte or you name it, a team that wouldn't normally be in a national TV situation, to get that kind of attention on them and to get people, because look, I mean, not everybody's watching the NBA like we are every single night and paying attention to all these. They're paying attention to the LeBron stories and the Kawhi stories and the Steph stories and stuff like that. And maybe if they live in Atlanta, the Hawks. But to give some of these guys some more exposure, because one of the things that I felt like when we were younger in that era of the NBA, I know that not every team had a chance to win a championship. I get that. It was still top heavy with Michael Jordan and Olajuwon in the mid 90s and the Pistons before that and the Lakers and Celtics before that. It still felt like every team had guys on it that you'd want to tune in for, though.
Right.
You know, like I'd watch a Bullets Hornets game so I could see Chris Webber and Juwan Howard playing against Larry Johnson and Alonzo Mourning or something like that. You know,
Right.
like I just felt like every team had guys that I was intrigued by. And the NBA has done such a weird job now of only focusing on like the 5 or 6 superstars in the league and really ignoring other teams in other markets, and even sometimes markets that have superstars. Like it took such a long time for Giannis and the Bucks to get the same level of exposure because they're in Milwaukee, even though Giannis is clearly one of the best players in the NBA for a while now. So I love that aspect of it, that you're going to get a little bit more spotlight on these teams. I love the format too. I'm with you. It rewards 7 and 8 for having better records than 9 and 10. It also gives 10 that crazy chance of you got to win 2 games if you're going to make it into the playoffs, which is fun. And we talked to Nate McMillan about this a couple weeks ago. I think Randy asked him, you know, what do you think of the play-in tournament? And he said, I love it because it gives 4 more teams in the league, and maybe even more than that, the teams that aren't going to make it but are close to making it, incentive to try.
Right.
Like it wasn't 2 years ago where we had more teams that were competitive to be the worst team in the NBA than we had teams that were competitive to be the best team in the NBA. And that's not good. Like it's not good for the product if there's more teams trying to be bad to get a lottery pick than there's teams that think they can win the championship. Not to say that the Hornets or the Wizards or whoever think they can win the championship this year, but at least they're being competitive to try to be in the playoffs, and it's curbing the tanking a little bit. So I was skeptical at first. I was like, I don't know. Plus now we get close to the playoffs and you see some of these matchups you're talking about, like the idea of the Wizards being able to play their way in and get the Nets, or because the Lakers have lost so many games recently, the idea of a Warriors Lakers 1 game
Right.
play-in game, like that. I mean, the juice behind that game would be unbelievable.
Yeah, and I was gonna get to that game when we move out west. But real quick, let's close out the East. You mentioned the Bucks. Is this like finals or bust for Milwaukee right now?
Yes.
I feel like it almost has to be. I
think it's finals or bust for Bud. If Coach Bud, if they don't make the finals this year, or I guess if, you know, it's hard to say definitively what the situation would be in the Eastern. If they go 7 games in the Eastern Conference Finals and lose to the Nets, and like KD and Kyrie and Harden are doing what everyone thinks they can do, then maybe that context saves Bud a little bit. But other than that, yeah, like they've been too good. Now they won 60 games and they gave Giannis all this money and they made the trade for Drew Holiday, and like they're in it. They're way too in it to not be trying to do everything they can to win. And, you know, maybe if they don't make it, people start to look at Coach Bud too, because you win 60 games in Atlanta and get swept by LeBron. Now, understand that Cavs team was great, and, you know, we all understand what happened there, but still, you won 60 and got in that moment and came up short. 160 with the Bucks a couple years ago, came up short. So, yeah, I think for him it is. For the core of the team, no, because those guys are going to be together for a while now. I mean, they pushed all their chips into the middle of the table with Giannis and Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton. So they're gonna be there for a minute.
Yeah, I personally, like I agree with everything you said about Coach Bud, but personally for me, I haven't always been sold on the Middleton factor. Like, he's a good player and he's a decent number 2. I just don't think he was that guy that's going to push you and get you over the edge or over the hump into the finals. He's had good games, and those are the reasons. Like, the games that he's had in the playoffs have gotten him those extensions and gotten the contracts. I don't think that it's for him I don't see them winning the championship with him as the number 2 type player. But you talked about Brooklyn. Brooklyn is this like in this type of season, is it win the finals or a bust for them, championship or a bust for Brooklyn Nets?
It should be. I mean, they traded for James Harden and they already had Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, like there's no more all-in move that you can possibly make
Right.
than getting all those guys at the same, you know what I mean? Like, how could they be any more I mean, I guess they got Blake Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge too, just to like make it very clear that they're going for it this season. And unfortunately, LaMarcus had to retire, but
Right.
Yeah, like that's the expectation. You don't get Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden to like make the Eastern Conference Finals. You get those guys to win championships, and those guys know that. I mean, there's guys in that group that have gone to places to win championships. There are guys that have won championships by just being a part of a dynamic duo in Kyrie and LeBron. And there's a guy in Harden who hasn't gotten one yet and knows what that means in the modern day and age, in the way that we talk about individuals and their legacy, however you want to put it. He knows what that says about him being as great of a player as he is and never been able to get there. So yeah, it is. It's championship. Now it's hard or bust, because then what? They're not breaking them up. Like they're going to be together, but the expectation is championship for sure.
Well, I say or bust, meaning I don't think they'll break them up, but I don't know how long they can stay together either.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Like, I don't know, like, because one, money, we all understand that.
Oh, yeah.
And then two, like at some point, we all look at the dynamic of these athletes. These are sensitive guys. Like we're talking about Kevin Durant, sensitive guys.
Especially those guys.
Kyrie Irving.
Not James. I don't think James is very sensitive. James doesn't care.
Right.
But KD and Kyrie, whew.
So if we go and we don't win one this year and it's a little rocky next year, I think somebody's going to write a book about what's going on in the locker room with those players. And,
yeah, I agree with what you're saying there.
I don't believe you can keep Blake Griffin. So you're going to have to try to continue to build around them to try to put a championship caliber team. Like you're going to have to do similar to what the Heat did to get you old veterans and that are, on the way out the door, or get some extremely young, young players that are going to basically buy into the system of what these guys are doing. But at the same time, they're going to have to be able to hold the rail if another player gets injured, if Kyrie gets injured, if KD gets injured, or, something like that. So, yeah, I think this is going to be a very interesting playoff series just to watch the Nets, just to see how this plays out for them. But,
yeah, I agree with what you're saying, too, about the short shelf life of this group. Like, if they don't win a championship this year, obviously the pressure is on for next year.
Right.
And if things get us a little sideways next year, you're right. Like, you're not riding with that group for 5 years if they haven't won anything. They'll ride with them if they're winning, sure. Like, that trio will stay together for however long as possible if they're winning championships. But you're right. They probably get 2 tries to not do it before somebody's feelings get hurt, or somebody decides they want to go someplace else, or they just decide that they can't afford to pay 3 guys that much money and not be winning championships for it. You got to try to build the team another way. Yeah, I could see that. The other thing too is they've only played 7 games together.
Right.
In the whole season.
Right.
There's only been 7 games where they've all been on the court at the same time. So
and then there's that.
Yeah, like I think that they'll be good when they're together in the playoffs. I think, but I haven't seen it yet. So there's still that side of it to who knows, because we haven't seen them do it long enough.
Well, yeah, I think everybody just assumes like, okay, you get these top 3 players in the same gym, that they're just gonna go hoop. They're just gonna go out there and basketball will take care of itself, and you will just see the talent rise above the rest, and they'll win the games or the series.
And maybe they will, but maybe not.
And so to that, like a second, the last team we'll touch on is, I put them all in the same boat, like the championship or bust type scenarios, is the Philadelphia 76ers. They've come along. They got Doc Rivers coming in. Joel Embiid is arguably an MVP type season. Ben Simmons seems to have found, where he can fit in, and he knows he's not the number one. I'm assuming he knows he's not the number one because the way the play on the court has been showing you that you're not the number one. But do you consider this a championship or bust type situation for the Sixers, or are they still building?
I think they're still building because it's year one with Doc. Like, Doc has had such a calming influence on that franchise. It's weird to have gone through a season and, there's been injuries, guys and
right.
all that, but they've won a lot, and they're just clearly such a better basketball team than they were when, what was the guy's name? Brown? What was his name? I forget his name all of a sudden, who had been there for all those years before as their coach. It's funny how quickly they just kind of became, oh yeah, they're good. Not a lot of drama. Just a solid good. That's the influence that Doc Rivers has, which is really great.
Yeah, because we heard all about apparently there was, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons didn't get along.
Right. But all went away.
We haven't heard that this season. We haven't heard anything about that.
Yeah, that all went away. And so I think because it's year one with Doc, and it kind of feels like a new direction for that group with how they're perceived now. The expectation is still really high. Yeah, they need to make the Eastern Conference Finals, and I feel like they've got just as good a chance as any of those three teams in the East to make the NBA Finals. Between them, Brooklyn, and Milwaukee, they all have their issues. They all have their strengths. And it's just going to be interesting to see how it plays out over a 7-game series. I guess the one thing with Doc is the knock on him in LA was he had all that talent too, and they never got over the hump there. They never even made a Western Conference Finals there. Now, Doc won a championship in Boston. I mean, when he had the big three in Boston, they won a championship. So it's not like he's never done it before. But I think that I'm in a little bit of a different, there's not as much urgency with me and them. And they're also young and under contract. They're going to be there. But again, you get a couple years down the road and they haven't won yet. Then it starts to be like, all right, what are we doing here? You've got the coach, you've got the players, you've got the money spent. Like, you got to start winning too.
And it was Brett Brown. It's been
Brett Brown.
I'm as you were talking, I'm sitting here looking like, Brown, yes, Brown is Brown. Like, it's Brett Brown.
I feel like a bad Boston University Terrier because he is also an alum of Boston University.
So let's move out west where we talked about, all of the things going on. We kind of touched on all of that. Like, I was thinking earlier as I was trying to put some stuff together to talk to you about, like, who's really the big dog out west? Like, who's the favorite? Like, is it Utah? Is it Phoenix? It doesn't feel like.
I guess it would have to be Utah, I guess.
It doesn't feel
I guess it would have to be Utah. I mean, and the other thing too is how healthy is LeBron? And
right.
It's the Lakers still too, because LeBron is going to be back. He's playing tonight against the Knicks. So we'll see what he looks like before they can get into the playoffs. But yeah, it's really weird to be like, yeah, this Utah team's had a really good year. Oh yeah, Phoenix, because Chris Paul has turned these guys into monsters. I really wish Jamal Murray was healthy, because I think Denver would be able to make a good run at it too, as good as Jokic has played this year. But yeah, we haven't had the question mark about the Western Conference playoffs that we have this year since who knows when. Like, because it's been the Warriors for all this time, right, and the Spurs were so good, and the Lakers before that. Like, it's so weird to go into a playoffs and be like, yeah,
who knows?
Maybe the Blazers get hot. Like, it's right. Very weird.
But and that's the thing, like, how it's interesting the way the NBA takes shape and how fast it moves, because like we were talking about, the Lakers just won a championship last year. There was a dominance of Golden State. And we've talked about earlier how now these are two teams who are going to be playing against each other possibly to get to the playoffs. Like, you have a champion, two basically champions. We still look at the Golden State Warriors as the Golden State Warriors. Like, we still look at them as champs, and they're scratching to survive.
Yeah, it's amazing what injuries can do, right? Obviously, LeBron and AD missing so much time this year is why the Lakers went from the top of the West down to borderline play-in. Klay Thompson, that injury before the season started, clearly derailed what the Warriors were going to try to do. And, you know, last year too, with Steph and Klay being out all year, that's how they end up in the lottery. And we're able to add James Wiseman that way. So
Also got hurt.
Who also got hurt. Yeah. And, you know, Draymond's just not the same Draymond as he was about 5 years ago. And they also don't have quite the same depth that they had. I mean, remember when they were firing on all cylinders, they had Andre Iguodala as like a fourth option or fifth option. Andrew Bogut was still really solid at center.
They got Bays back.
That's right. They got Bays. Bays out there causing Twitter fights with Bradley Beal. They had Sean Livingston as the backup point guard, who was just unbelievable on those teams. So, yeah, it's wild how quickly that's happened there. It's also fun to see Steph like have to do what he's doing, like have to go out and make 11 threes per game just to keep them in these games.
Right.
It's kind of been cool to see Steph bounce back from that injury and, I don't know, shut some people up a little bit about how good he is. For whatever reason, like he had anything to prove. I don't know what people's issue was with Steph, but.
Well, there's always, like I feel like there's a section of people who sole job is to just doubt and just cast the doubt, just hate, like the player haters bought old Dave Chappelle skit, just hate, and but with Steph, man, it's you watch him and he's all the things that's fun about the league, especially when he's cooking. When he 49 points in 29 minutes, and he's doing that. He's got the shimmy going, and yes, it's all threes from all over the place from 30, 40 feet. He's making layups. He's making guys fall off the dribble. Steph is one of the most interesting guys to watch, or one of the most entertaining guys to watch play basketball, and it doesn't matter who they're playing against. Like, I put him in that same category. Like, he's fun to watch. Dame is fun to watch, but Dame is a serious figure. Like, Dame isn't out here playing with you at all. He's not shimmying. Yeah,
Steph's having fun dancing around. Dame just wants to kill you.
Dame is just, like you said, he just wants to kill you. And you take fun in watching him do his work. So, and that's a team. I had a friend of mine call me, and he's just like, man, I don't know where I've been, like, on the Dame train, but I like him. And I'm like, it's because he plays in Portland. Like, like you said, only guys like us who stay up all night long, who watch all the games, who go through and having like the NBA ticket, and you'll watch, and in league pass or whatever, you'll watch all the games, and I'll just stop and I'll just watch, and it'll be 12:30, and you'll watch Portland play, like you said, we'll play Phoenix, and you're like, damn, this is a good game, but the rest of the world isn't watching. So they don't see.
Well, that was the funniest thing. I worked in Portland for 2 years doing a show on the Blazers radio station. Like when Dame was really emerging, he was good. He was an all-star, but he wasn't an all NBA guy quite yet. And like, he'd go out and score 45 and have 25 in the fourth, hit a game winner, whatever, like just be as dynamic and dominant as anybody in the league. And then you'd like turn on SportsCenter the next day and they wouldn't talk about it. It's like, well,
right,
what's going on? Like, this team's making the playoffs. This guy's averaging 30 a night. He's got, he does the Dame time, and he's got his own shoe. Like, what's going on? Like, how come nobody knows about this guy? We have cable. I understand Portland's far away, but it's not like you have to drive to the game to watch it. Like, it's so weird how those long-standing small market perceptions remain. Like, New York just gets treated how they get treated because they're New York. Portland gets treated how they get treated because they're Portland. And it's weird in this day and age where we have, I mean, I'm not going to either one of those places. I'm just sitting in my living room watching on TV. Why am I getting force-fed stuff that doesn't really matter from big markets when you could be telling me about actual interesting, relevant stuff from small markets where guys are out there balling? And CJ McCollum, same thing. Like if CJ McCollum played in Boston, people would talk about him all the time as, oh, you got to trade him and max him and all this stuff. He plays in Portland, nobody talks about him.
And think about CJ. He came from what, Lehigh?
Yeah, Lehigh. And Dame came from Weber State.
Right.
Like, you guys came from nowhere.
So, and to me, they're one of the most rootable teams in the playoffs. Like, and then you throw in the Melo that everybody threw away and just wrote off, and he found a home in Portland. It was like he was on the market, like you couldn't give him away. Like everybody,
had to go all the way out to Portland to find a home.
and now everybody's looking around like, damn, we didn't know Carmelo Anthony still had it.
And we could really use Melo's 12 off the bench every night.
Right. So yeah, I really believe that this is one of the most rootable teams, and I hope that they can, depending on how it shakes out, I hope that we can watch them for a very long time in terms of the playoffs. Kind of pushing forward, we agree that Nikola Jokic is the MVP. I mean, I talked about Joel Embiid having an MVP type season, but I don't believe he's the MVP. I believe the Joker is.
I do too.
Yeah. And to solidify it, I mean, Jamal Murray goes down, and I won't say they didn't miss a beat, but in the standings, they haven't taken a beating in terms of them going down from, I think they're in fourth, somewhere around the third or fourth right now, but they're still there. And to me, I think he's a player in terms of Jokic. He's a player that other players can play around, and you watch the game, and you can see that he's becoming the focal point. He's already the focal point of that unit. And now you have a young star like a Michael Porter Jr., who I'll tell anybody, if you're not watching, watch this young man play basketball, because he's a hell of a player. And he's a player that when Murray goes down, a Porter Jr. can come out and he can say, okay, well, I'll start doing some of these things. Bol is yet to emerge as to whatever, but I think that Denver, you touched on it earlier, Denver was one of those teams that I was looking forward to seeing because of what they did last year in the bubble and what they had coming back. I was looking forward to them. But now, I mean, how far do you think they'll make it in terms of the NBA playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Western Conference Finals is probably ceiling. They could lose in the second round depending on the matchup.
Right.
And that feels really unfortunate, because you know how good Jamal Murray is, but you also just know how good he was in the playoffs, in the bubble. He's so clutch. Those battles that he was having last year, the point outputs that you were getting in that series was outrageous. Like, it's historic stuff we've never seen before. So, and now you have Jokic playing at the level that he's playing at. And I always enjoy him this time of year when people kind of tune in that hadn't been watching, and they're like, hang on, that guy? Like that? And he's in better shape than he used to be. So he's not as pudgy hanging around out there. But he's still like, people are like, wait, that big, slow white guy is the MVP of the NBA? Like, yeah, watch him play for 48 minutes. Like, oh, he's hitting threes. He's throwing behind the back passes. He's setting great picks. Like, okay, I get it.
And I always say, and I won't say always say, but I made it this season when he started actually turning that corner, that he's actually closer to what Larry Bird was, other than how everybody tried to put it on Luka. Luka's way more athletic than Larry Bird was. But if you look at the Joker's game and how he plays, because Larry played a lot of times, he played on the inside, he played outside, he shot the three, because the three-point shot wasn't like, right. If you made three of them in a game at that point in time in the 80s, you were shooting. You know what I'm saying? So But like his game is actually closer to Larry Bird's than what Luka's game is actually when they put it.
Yeah, I mean, Luka's game is so modern. People are just so lazy. They want to compare him to any white guy who's like around the same size. Like Luka's game is modern. I mean, he takes step back threes,
Right.
and pushes the tempo and gets assists. Like, I know Larry could pass the ball too, but like Luka doesn't play. Larry played like he played imagine Larry Bird playing now with the 3-point line and the emphasis. Like, I think of a few guys that were just so ahead of their time that if they had, like Dale Ellis. Imagine Dale Ellis in the modern NBA, a guy that could give you 8 threes in a game and not think twice about it.
Right.
If that dude played now, he'd be a max contract player. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I think there's some comparisons. What's that?
I'm just, as you posed that, I instantly went to Reggie Miller.
Yeah, Reggie Miller, great example. Absolutely, a guy who's making threes way before there was that emphasis on them. I like Jokic for similar reasons to Westbrook. Not that they're the same player by any stretch. They couldn't be any more different. But there's only one guy like him in the NBA right now. Like, it's so fun to have guys where it's like you watch him play, and there's nobody else that does that. There's nobody else that plays like center, stretch center, point guard, whatever the hell you want to call it, quarterback. He's kind of the quarterback. Like,
basically,
nobody plays basketball like Nikola Jokic does. And it's also really cool that they've just kind of built that offense around that. They're like, all right, we have this rare talent that can do all these things. Let's put guys around him that fit in with that well. And then let's focus our offense around his skill set that no one else has. And it's also fun to see him getting that recognition as well. Like, a couple years ago, you never would have considered him as an MVP candidate, and he'll probably win it this year, which is great. So right. I love that.
And it's been interesting to watch that transition because I don't remember exactly where he was selected, but I know he wasn't like a super high lottery draft pick. So he wasn't one of these guys who said, oh, he's an immaculate talent. He's worked himself into being where he is, and that's the commendable part. That's the part that you have to salute, because of, to know that a player probably won't be able to, like, just, he wasn't this at the beginning, and now he's worked himself into being an MVP is dope. But I want to go ahead. We touched on Luka really quickly. Luka gets compared to Trey a lot, but if we're going to say the Hawks have to get out of the first round, don't we have to do that same thing for Luka Doncic? Don't we have to say he has to get his team out of the first round as well?
Yeah, if people are saying that about Trey, sure. I mean, I think it's a weird situation right now with Dallas because they've kind of put some pieces around him. They had better pieces when he got drafted than they have now. It almost feels like it's kind of like, it's Luka and it's Porzingis, who's he's fine. Like, he's not what he was billed to be when he was first with the Knicks, and maybe the injury is about it. He's a good player, but if Porzingis is your second best player, you're not winning a championship. And then you got Tim Hardaway Jr., and that's kind of their trio. Right. I think it's pretty impressive what they've been able to do this year as far as the games they've won, given what that roster is. But yeah, I mean, put all the if Luka wants to, and I guess Luka, this isn't really Luka, it's not fair. He's not doing it. He's just playing basketball. But if the media wants to treat Luka the way that they do and make him an MVP candidate and put him on first team this and make him an all-star every year and just sort of elevate him to this stratosphere that I guess they don't consider, Trey doesn't get to be a part of that. Other guys aren't there yet. If Luka is that, then yeah, there should be that pressure. Why not? If he's one of the 5 best players in the NBA, which I don't think that he is. I think he may be in the next few years, but I don't think he's there yet. But he gets treated like he's one of those guys. Then the expectations come with it. You don't get to be national TV, all the hype, all the the lists that he gets to be on with all these other great players, and then somehow escape the pressure of that come playoff. That's not the way that it works. Now, again, I don't hear that from the national pundits. All I hear is Luka is great. He's the best thing we've ever seen since this. Yeah, but hopefully it'll be great if they make the playoffs. Now, hang on a second. If he's as good as you guys are saying he is, then they should be in the damn playoffs.
Right.
Maybe he's 22 and still getting better. Like, maybe you don't have to say he's all these things yet. I don't know. You know how people do. Everybody has to be either hyped up or knocked down. Like you said, there's just people just sitting around hating on people for no reason.
For no damn reason. Just hate. Also, speaking of hate, probably finishing up here, the last team that seems to always get hated on, the Clippers. Like, where this has to be, how long does this stretch go? Like, this has to be championship or bust, or at least finals or bust, right?
Yeah, it should be. Absolutely. You've got Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. I mean, and you've got Kawhi Leonard and Paul George in their primes right now. I mean, every year you don't win it, you get further away from those two guys being in their primes. Again, just like we talked about with the Nets, you don't have those guys, and they picked the Clippers too, by the way.
Right.
Kawhi picked the Clippers and recruited Paul George to go there with him. You don't do that to make the Western Conference Finals. You do that to win a championship. So yeah, it absolutely. And it's funny to say all these different teams, because we've probably said 4 or 5 teams now championship, and only one of them is going to win the championship. But that means that those other teams, the pressure is on them.
Right.
And that's the way that this goes. I mean, there's been championship or bust on teams going back 5-6 years that didn't win it, so they busted. Think about the Pacers when Paul George was there all those years ago. They were supposed to win a championship, or at least the expectation was that they built around him to do that. They didn't do it, so they broke it up. I'm trying to think of other the Rockets. The Rockets were built to win a championship. They didn't do it, so they blew it up. The Thunder were built to win a championship. Didn't work out, so they blew it up. That's what we mean when we say bust. You get a couple years to try, but if you don't end up getting it done.
Yeah, and it's all, and the thing that was crazy for me in terms of the Clippers was that last season, Paul George did a lot of deflecting. It was, he blamed on being in the bubble. He threw Doc under the bus a couple times, saying that he didn't draw up the plays that put him in the best position. And so now that focus is on him and on Kawhi, because I heard someone else say Kawhi gets a pass because he's won it before. And I don't think that's the case. Like, you didn't do it there. You haven't done it in this particular place, in this particular space. So no, you don't get the pass in my book. But
if I'm a Clippers fan, what does that do for me? Cool, you got a championship in Toronto and San Antonio. I don't have one.
Right. So I think they're both on the hook. Like you said, they chose the Clippers, and so they have a certain, responsibility to try to go all out for them. But it'll be interesting to see how they land, because, like we said, the West is wide open. It's more wide open than it's probably ever been in the past 20 years, really.
I don't think it's been this open since Jordan retired. And I know Jordan wasn't in the West, he was in the East, but those years where the Rockets and the Sonics, and the Suns and the Jazz were all really good, and we didn't know who was going to win. It felt pretty open then. Yeah, that's a long time ago. It's like 30 years ago.
Exactly. So, I appreciate you for coming out, Andy. I also want to do, we have to do this again, because you opened up a portal to this mythical, if players played today, that I've just been going through, and I've been thinking of guys ever since you said it. But we have to go through. I want to go through that. Also, how long were you in Portland?
2 seasons, 2 basketball seasons.
Okay.
So almost
you
almost
there,
4 years, 2 basketball seasons.
You weren't there during the Brandon Roy years.
No, but I went to middle school with Brandon Roy.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, see, and that, because he was like my secret obsession. Like I said, when everyone else was asleep, I felt like I was the only one in the world. Like, you have to watch this dude play basketball. So
yeah, he was special. He would have been, his knees wouldn't have gone out on him. He was 3-time All-Star at that point. He was about to be on the Olympic team. He was like 25, so he was really stepping into his prime. He was going to be one of those guys. I mean, he was going to be one of the 5 best guys in the league, and injuries took it from him.
So yeah, we definitely have to chop it up.
But we did win the city championship in 8th grade, though. So
I bet. I bet. And I'm sure you. What option were you? Were you the first option?
No, I didn't even get in the game. But when I got in the game, it was pass it to Brandon. that was the play. Okay. Here, Brandon.
What was that? The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air? Get the ball to Will. Well, yeah, I appreciate you for coming out, man, and chopping it up with me on the Commissioner's Conversation. Like I said, everyone can tune in to you and Randy, 2 of my favorite guys, on 92.9 The Game every Monday through Friday from 10 to 1 and just, 10 to 2. Oh, my bad, yeah. 10 to 2. I'm shorting you. But yes, so I appreciate you, man. And anytime you want to come back, open invitation. The door is always.
Thanks for having me.
Definitely.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, take it easy.